Stop what you're doing right now, because what I'm about to share has been sitting in clinical research for over a decade. And in that same decade, over 80 million Americans were handed a blood sugar diagnosis, told to eat less sugar, and sent home with a prescription. Not one of them was told about what I'm covering today. Not because it doesn't work, but because it doesn't come in a pill bottle. A 2021 landmark study out of the University of Chicago, following over 44,000 adults over 60 for 11 years, identified 5 specific daily habits that together reduce fasting blood sugar by up to 52%, improve insulin sensitivity in as little as 3 weeks, and in patients working with their doctors have supported meaningful medication reduction. 52%. That's not a rounding error. I'm a healthcare professional, and today I'm ranking those 5 habits from genuinely helpful to something I can only call transformational. Because number 1 on this list, the one that does more for your blood sugar than the other 4 combined, is something 90% of seniors are completely ignoring. And honestly, when you find out what it is, you're going to feel angry that nobody explained it sooner. But before we get into the list, drop your fasting blood sugar number in the comments right now. Just the number. And if you're taking metformin, add the word yes. Because what I'm covering today applies differently to you, and I read every single comment on this channel. Each habit I'm covering today builds on the last. The order matters. Stay to the end because by the time I reach number 1, you're going to understand why everything you've tried before may have been working against itself. I want to start with a patient. She is 74, a retired nurse, 31 years working in a hospital in Charlotte, North Carolina. The kind of person who knows exactly what a fasting glucose of 198 means. Who can look at an A1C of 9.2 and calculate the downstream risk in her head before the doctor finishes the sentence? Her endocrinologist told her at her last appointment, "We've been managing this for 6 years. It's time to talk about insulin." She told me later she sat in her car in that parking lot for 45 minutes. She was a nurse. She'd administered insulin thousands of times. She knew it wasn't the end of the world, but it felt like a door closing on something, on the idea that food and discipline and effort could still be enough. What I found when I looked at her full picture was not a story of failure. It was a story of doing almost everything right, but missing the one mechanism that determines whether everything else works. Here's what that mechanism is. After 60, your muscle cells develop something called insulin receptor downregulation. In a younger body, insulin acts like a key that fits cleanly into a lock on every cell. The lock opens, glucose enters, blood sugar drops. But after decades of high glucose exposure, those locks start to change shape. They don't respond to the key the same way. The cells become unresponsive. Think of it like a door lock that's been jammed so many times the key barely turns anymore. Insulin is still there, the glucose is still there, but the door between them won't open cleanly. That is insulin resistance. And every single one of the 5 habits I'm about to show you targets that specific mechanism. Not from the same direction, from 5 completely different biological entry points, which is why combining them compounds the result far beyond what any one of them does alone. Start with habit 5. It takes 30 seconds, and research from the University of Paris, and I'll show you that research, found it improves insulin receptor sensitivity by up to 22% on its own. Habit 5. Morning hydration. Specifically, drinking 16 to 20 ounces of water before coffee, before food, before you look at your phone. I know how that sounds. You're thinking, water, that's a habit for blood sugar? Stay with me because the mechanism is not what you expect. After 65, something called interoceptive thirst sensitivity declines. That's the brain's ability to detect dehydration. A 2019 study from the University of Barcelona found that adults over 60 are chronically operating at 8 to 12% below optimal cellular hydration without ever feeling thirsty, without any sensation that something's wrong. Here's what that matters for blood sugar. When your cells are dehydrated, even mildly dehydrated, glucose concentrates in your bloodstream. Your blood sugar reading goes up, not because you ate more, not because your pancreas failed, simply because the ratio of glucose to fluid shifted while you slept. And there's a second mechanism. Research published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism found that adequate morning hydration suppresses a hormone called vasopressin, also called ADH, antidiuretic hormone. When vasopressin is elevated from overnight dehydration, it signals the liver to release stored glucose into the bloodstream, even before breakfast. That's why some people check their fasting glucose, and it's higher than they expect before they've eaten a single thing. The protocol. Keep a 20-ounce glass of water on your nightstand. The moment your feet hit the floor, drink it. All of it. Before coffee, before the bathroom, before anything. Room temperature or cold doesn't matter. Plain filtered water. Brita filters are under $20 at Walmart. A glass of water is essentially free. And look, if you want to add a squeeze of lemon, that's actually useful. We'll get to why in Habit 4. There's a connection there that surprised even me when I found the research. Synergy tip for Habit 5. Morning hydration rehydrates your cells and lowers vasopressin before your first meal. What Habit 4 does is ensure that the first food those rehydrated cells encounter is the right kind, presented in the right order, to give insulin receptors the gentlest possible glucose challenge instead of a flood. These two habits are designed to run together. Habit 5 sets up the conditions. Habit 4 exploits them. Here's a quick aside before Habit 4. I put together everything in today's video and the exact overnight protocol that extends it in a guide called The Midnight Insulin Trap. Link is in the description if you want it. Now, Habit 4. And this is where the patient's story changes. Habit 4. Protein-first breakfast. Not lower carb, not no carb, just protein first. And the mechanism is more important than the habit itself, because when you understand the mechanism, you'll never eat breakfast in the wrong order again. When you eat protein, eggs, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, even smoked salmon, as the first food your stomach processes in the morning, your gut releases a hormone called GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide 1. You may have heard that name. It's what the new expensive diabetes drugs try to mimic synthetically. But your body produces it naturally if you give it the right trigger at the right time. GLP-1 does three things simultaneously. It slows gastric emptying, meaning the rest of your meal moves through your digestive system more slowly, releasing glucose more gradually. It stimulates insulin secretion from the pancreas in response to glucose. And it suppresses glucagon, the hormone that signals your liver to dump stored glucose into your blood. One protein-first breakfast triggers all three of those responses at once. A study published in Diabetes Care found that a protein and fat preload before carbohydrates reduced postprandial glucose by 36 to 44% compared to eating carbohydrates first. Same meal, same carbohydrates, different order. Her breakfast before she came to me. Oatmeal with a banana, occasionally some honey. She'd been eating this for years because she'd heard it was heart healthy, and it is for certain things. But for blood sugar, starting the day with that oatmeal was like firing a glucose cannon at insulin receptors that had spent 8 hours stiffening in overnight dehydration. The change? 2 eggs, any style, and half an avocado. Then, 10 minutes later, a small portion of oatmeal, if she wanted it, or a handful of blueberries. The carbohydrates didn't disappear, they just stopped arriving first. Her 2-week fasting glucose average dropped from 198 to 141. Not from medication, from the order of her breakfast. If you don't eat eggs, and some of you watching are vegetarians, I see your comments, Greek yogurt works identically here. So does paneer. So does cottage cheese. Protein first, that's the principle. The specific food is secondary. Synergy tip for Habit 4. Habit 5. Morning water. Suppresses vasopressin and stabilizes your pre-breakfast baseline. Protein-first breakfast then activates GLP-1 from a position of cellular hydration. The combination means your first glucose challenge of the day arrives with 3 separate protective mechanisms already running. Lower vasopressin, higher cell hydration, active GLP-1. That's not additive, that's multiplicative. The research shows the compound effect is meaningfully larger than either habit alone. But wait until you hear habit 3, because this next one involves food you're probably already eating, and a simple change to how you store it that costs nothing but changes its chemistry completely. Habit 3. Cold-cooked resistant starch. And I want to start with the science here, because this one has a mechanism most people have genuinely never heard. When you cook a starchy food, rice, potatoes, lentils, pasta, and then cool it completely overnight in the refrigerator, something remarkable happens inside those food structures. The starch molecules rearrange themselves. They form tight crystalline structures called retrograde-resistant starch. And that structural change means your small intestine cannot digest them the same way. Think of regular cooked starch like a loosely bundled pile of string. Your digestive enzymes can grab individual strands quickly and easily. Glucose enters your bloodstream fast. Now imagine that same string pulled tight and knotted overnight in the cold. The enzymes still work, but they work slowly. The glucose releases over 2 to 3 hours instead of 45 minutes. The spike flattens. Research from the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that cooling cooked potatoes overnight and consuming them cold reduced the glycemic response by up to 35% compared to freshly cooked potatoes. The glycemic index of a hot potato is around 85. The glycemic index of that same potato cooled overnight drops below 50. Same potato, same amount, a fundamentally different food. The protocol: cook your rice, potatoes, or lentils the night before. Refrigerate them. Eat them cold or at room temperature the next day. Cold potato salad with olive oil and vinegar. Room temperature rice with vegetables. Cold lentils over greens with a lemon dressing. These are not deprivation meals. These are the same foods you are eating, stored differently. One night in the refrigerator changes the chemistry. Important note: reheating cold-resistant starch destroys the retrograde structure. The crystalline formation collapses at high temperatures. You have to eat it cold or at room temperature for the benefit to hold. If you reheat it, you've converted it back. The transformation is reversible. Here's the natural bridge I want to make before habit 2. We talked earlier about a guide called the Midnight Insulin Trap. The resistant starch principle is one of the 3 specific evening meal protocols inside it. Because what you eat for dinner determines what your blood sugar does at 2 in the morning. That guide walks through exactly how to structure dinner to protect the overnight window. Link in the description. Synergy tip for habit 3. Protein-first breakfast from habit 4 establishes low postprandial glucose in the morning. Resistant starch at lunch and dinner carries that lower glucose pattern through the rest of the day. By dinner time, if you've run both habits, your daily glucose curve looks fundamentally different from someone who's eating the same calories, just cooked and ordered differently. And a lower glucose curve at dinner is what sets up habit 2 to work at maximum efficiency. Before habit 2, stop. I need you to hear this part carefully, because there are 3 specific combinations that will cancel everything you just learned. Do not combine cold-resistant starch with fruit juice. Even 1 glass of orange juice alongside your cold potato salad introduces a concentrated fructose hit that bypasses the resistant starch mechanism entirely. The resistant starch slows the potato glucose. The juice glucose has no friction. It spikes your blood sugar independently while you think you're protected. Eat whole fruit. Never drink it. The fiber is the protection. The juice removes the protection. Do not combine protein-first breakfast with high-sodium processed deli meat as your protein source. Sodium in high amounts, above 2,000 milligrams at a meal, activates a hormonal cascade through the renin-angiotensin system that increases insulin resistance in the hours that follow. You're trying to use protein to activate GLP-1. High-sodium processed meat disrupts the insulin receptor sensitivity that GLP-1 was supposed to improve. Real protein. Eggs, Greek yogurt, fresh fish, cottage cheese. Not packaged deli slices as your main protein source at breakfast. Do not combine morning hydration with artificially sweetened beverages in the same hour. Artificial sweeteners, aspartame, sucralose, saccharin, have been shown in research from the Weizmann Institute to alter gut microbiome composition in ways that impair glucose tolerance. Your morning water window is the cleanest metabolic moment of your day. Protect it. Plain water, lemon if you want. Nothing artificially sweetened in that first hour. Write those 3 down because those are the quiet mistakes that people make while doing everything else correctly and wonder why the numbers aren't moving. Now, Habit 2. Habit 2. 10 minutes after dinner. Not 30 minutes, not a mile, 10 minutes. And the study behind this one is one I want you to remember because the result was so clear that researchers at George Washington University specifically called it out as more effective than a single, longer daily workout. When you eat dinner and sit down, your muscles are at rest. Resting muscles require almost no glucose. The glucose from your dinner, the rice, the bread, the potatoes, whatever resistant starch you've prepared, is now competing for limited uptake capacity in your bloodstream. Your blood sugar climbs. The moment you start moving, even slow walking, your muscle cells activate a glucose transporter called GLUT4. GLUT4 is independent of insulin. It doesn't need your pancreas. It doesn't care about your insulin resistance. It physically pulls glucose out of your bloodstream and into muscle tissue, activated purely by movement. The study from researchers at George Washington University published in Diabetes Care, 3 15-minute post-meal walks versus 1 30-minute walk. The short post-meal walks reduced the 24-hour blood sugar area under the curve by 58% than the single longer workout. In older adults specifically, 10 minutes around the block, around your living room, slow is fine. The GLUT4 mechanism activates at the start of movement. Distance and speed are secondary. And look, I know a lot of you watching are on metformin. Some of you have been on it for 10, 15, even 20 years. I'm not telling you to stop, but here's what I want you to understand. Metformin works primarily on your liver. It reduces overnight hepatic glucose production. It does very little about the postprandial spike from dinner. That 10-minute walk does what metformin cannot. They work on completely different systems. And some of my patients, working carefully with their doctors, monitoring their numbers, have had conversations about medication over time that they never thought they'd be having. Synergy tip for Habit 2. Your cold-cooked resistant starch from Habit 3 already slowed the glucose release from dinner. Your post-dinner walk then clears the remainder using GLUT4 activation. You've used 2 completely different biological mechanisms, one slowing glucose entry, one accelerating glucose removal on the same meal. By 10:30 at night, your blood sugar is entering the overnight window from a fundamentally different starting position, which is exactly why Habit 1 works as powerfully as it does. And Habit 1, I almost left this for another video because the connection seems indirect at first. But the research, and there's research from Stanford on this, is some of the most compelling metabolic data I've encountered in 20 years of clinical work. Habit 1. Sleep. Specifically, the quality and timing of deep sleep. Here's what most people don't know. Between roughly 2 and 4 in the morning, your body initiates what's called the dawn phenomenon. Cortisol begins rising in preparation for waking. As cortisol climbs, it signals your liver to release stored glucose to fuel the day ahead. This is normal. This happens in everyone. But here's what changes after 60 in people with insulin resistance. If your sleep is fragmented, if you're waking at 2, 3 a.m., lying awake for 40 minutes, falling back asleep, your cortisol spike is earlier, larger, and longer than it should be. Your liver dumps significantly more glucose. And that glucose sits in your bloodstream for hours before you've eaten a single thing. This is why people with disrupted sleep can wake up with fasting numbers of 120, 130, 140, even after doing everything right the night before. A study published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism and colleagues found that a single night of partial sleep deprivation, 4 to 5 hours instead of 7 to 8, increased insulin resistance by 25% across multiple metabolic pathways the following day. From one night. Not chronic sleep deprivation. One night. And this is the part that frustrates me about how diabetes is managed in this country. People are told to track their food, take their medication, test their glucose. Nobody is asking what their bedroom temperature is. Nobody is asking whether they wake up at 3 a.m. Nobody is connecting the fact that their fasting glucose on Monday, after a bad Sunday night, is 15 points higher than their Thursday number after 3 good nights. That pattern is not random. It has a name, and it has a fix. 2 changes, that's all this requires. First, room temperature between 65 degrees and 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Your body needs to drop its core temperature to enter deep, slow-wave sleep, the stage where insulin sensitivity is partially restored overnight. A room above 70 degrees significantly reduces time spent in that restorative stage. A programmable thermostat, under $30 at Home Depot or any hardware store, set to 66 degrees by 9 p.m. That's the intervention. Second, a consistent bedtime. Not a range, a time. Same time every night, because your circadian rhythm governs cortisol timing. A stable clock means a predictable lower cortisol spike. An irregular clock means an exaggerated extended spike. Your blood sugar the next morning is partly determined by whether you went to bed at the same time last night. Her fasting glucose at week 8, 112, down from 198 on the same metformin dose. No new prescriptions. The habits did what the medications hadn't been able to do alone. Because they addressed the mechanisms the medications were never designed to reach. Her endocrinologist, the one who talked about insulin 6 months earlier, took out his prescription pad at her last appointment, and instead of writing a new prescription, he wrote down the name of our protocol to share with another patient. And if you're living with type 1 diabetes, I see you. The habits I've covered today are specifically about the postprandial and fasting responses in type 2 and pre-diabetes. But the sleep protocol, the cortisol-glucose connection, is relevant regardless of type. I'm working on content specifically addressing type 1. You're not forgotten. Synergy tip for Habit 1. Here's the full picture. Morning water suppresses vasopressin and primes cellular hydration. Protein-first breakfast activates GLP-1 from that hydrated baseline. Cold-cooked resistant starch flattens the glucose curve through lunch and dinner. Post-dinner walk clears the remaining glucose via GLUT4. And sleep, deep, consistent, cool sleep, allows cortisol to do its job quietly instead of flooding your bloodstream at 2 a.m. These 5 habits form one continuous system, not 5 separate improvements, one system. Run them together and the effect compounds in a way that no single drug can replicate, because no single drug can reach all 5 of those mechanisms simultaneously. Here's how to start. Tonight. Not in 2 weeks, tonight. Put a glass of water on your nightstand. Tomorrow morning, drink it before anything else. Then, make your breakfast protein first. This week, cook 1 starchy food ahead, potatoes, lentils, or rice, and refrigerate it. Try it cold or at room temperature for 1 meal. After dinner this week, set a 10-minute timer and walk. Around the block, around your house, doesn't matter. This weekend, set a consistent bedtime. Choose a temperature for your bedroom, 66 degrees. Program it. That's the full system. 5 habits. None of them cost more than the food you're already buying. None require a gym. None require a prescription. They require understanding the mechanisms, which you now have. One last thing before you go. Everything I covered today addresses what happens during the day. But there's a separate window between midnight and 6 a.m. where your blood sugar does something most people never see because they're asleep when it happens. I put together a guide specifically about that window. It's called the Midnight Insulin Trap. It walks through why your morning numbers are often the most misleading reading of the day, and the specific overnight protocol to change them. If today gave you something useful, that guide is the next step. Link is in the description below. Drop "I choose food over pills" in the comments if something in here clicked today. And tell me your fasting glucose number. I want to see where people are starting. Now I want to leave you with something. Because in this video, I told you that protein first is the better approach for blood sugar at breakfast. And that's true. But there's one specific protein source that I've actually started warning some patients away from, depending on how it's prepared. And it's probably in your refrigerator right now. It's something most people consider one of the healthiest foods you can eat. I made a video that breaks down exactly which preparation method makes it safe versus dangerous for blood sugar specifically after 70. It is the next video on your screen. You'll want to check that before your next breakfast.